Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. For you watching on CBS News streaming, welcome to our very sumptuous apartment-like set here on the main floor of the CBS News Bureau in Washington, D.C. For those of you in audio land, it's just a very nice, comfortable place. No restaurant this week. As you all know, the Democratic National Convention kicks off next week, so I thought it would be really good to have a lengthy conversation, as we always do here, with somebody with tremendous memory and experience about the last time the Democratic Party nominated a woman to lead the presidential ticket. Robby Mook, campaign manager for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Robby, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
What should the Harris campaign be most excited about right now and most worried about?
Yeah. Well, the momentum that erupted when she became the presumptive nominee has been, I think, was beyond anybody's expectations. So that's something they should be really excited about. And I always believe on a campaign, when you have momentum, you just need to vacuum up all that support, all that energy, and galvanize it into something you can use when you start to get headwinds. So raise all the money you can. All these volunteers that are coming in, get them to work, get them trained, get them motivated, build relationships with them. That's really important and something that they should be really excited about. I think what I'd be worried about is she has had a window, and she still has a window to define what this race is about. But that window is finite, and it probably closes in early September. You know, this honeymoon that everybody's talking about. It's very real, and it's happening, and I think it'll continue through Labor Day. The opportunity she has in this race, which is remarkable when you think about it, is Americans really want change. They want to turn the page. They want a new chapter in our politics. They're very unhappy with the way politics has been the last 10 or so years, let's say. She, as an incumbent vice president, can run as a change candidate. She can credibly go out there to the electorate and say, I want to turn the page on our politics. Donald Trump is the past. He's the way we've done things. I'm a new direction, which is remarkable when you step back and think about that. So she has all the advantages of incumbency, all the advantages of being a challenger, to the status quo. But to harness that, she has to claim that mantle as a change candidate. And I think to do that, she needs to prove that she has a vision for the future that is relatable to everyday people. And I think we're seeing that. She's supposedly doing this economic speech. She's going to focus on lowering prices, which is a slight pivot from where Biden was. He was more about job creation and his record. She's more future-oriented, more about a vision. If she can do that well, if she can claim that mantle by the end of the convention, that she is the page turner in our politics right now, I think she's very well set up. But that is a finite window. And then the other thing is, the headwinds are coming in September. She's going to have to do interviews. There's going to be a debate. It's just riskier stuff, right? So she'll have to, lock herself in as a change candidate and then defend what ground she's gained in the weeks after that.
We're recording this on August 15th, so by the time some of you hear this, the economic speech from Kamala Harris will already be out, be digested. So just remember that. Sometimes we do things to show in advance of future events that may redefine some of the conversation here. I want to point out for our audience something that I think is worth considering. Right now, according to the Real Clear Politics average, Kamala Harris is running 0.9 percentage points ahead of Donald Trump, not even one full percentage point. By way of contrasting, on August 15th of 2016, Hillary Clinton was running 6.8% ahead of Donald Trump. That dropped to 1.5% in mid-September. It was back up to 6.7% in mid-October. And on Election Day, it was 3.2%. So for all the Democrats who look at this Harris edge and say, oh, my God, the race is won, you say, Robby Mook.
Oh, absolutely not. Just to put this in two important pieces of context. Number one, what Harris has done, which is remarkable, I want to be clear, it's remarkable. She brought this race from one that we were definitively losing to one where we are tied and competitive. We are not where Biden, you talked about 2016, she is not where Biden was when he won in 2020. So we've brought this to a tightly contested race that we can win. Okay, number one. Number two, for a Democrat to win the Electoral College, you were getting to this, we probably need to win the race by 4 to 5 points, all right? And Hillary's a great example of this. Won the popular vote, but just didn't win it by enough. She probably needed over 4 points. So, congratulations, we have a dead heat, which means we're in the hunt. But the other point that I think is important.
But also, if I hear you, that means you still have a high probability of losing.
I would say it is a dead heat. In my mind, that's a 50-50 race. And I would argue, given the agitation among the electorate right now, people are not happy with the direction of the country. That's not good for the incumbent party. Okay. Now, again, I think she has an opportunity to weaponize that. It's like Sun Tzu: take your opponent's greatest advantage and turn it into a weakness. Donald Trump's advantage was that he was going to change from Joe Biden. We can say, oh yeah, he's going to change. He's going to bring us back, not bring us forward. So I think we have that opportunity. But the other point that I think is important to remember here is we don't know. Well, I think it's safe to say the polling was inaccurate in 2016. And guess what? It might be inaccurate again. It might be inaccurate to our benefit. It might be accurate to Trump's benefit. We don't know. I think there's good reason to believe right now that Democrats, because Harris is doing so well, are excited to take polls. And that can sometimes build a bias into the polling. I think Trump supporters were excited to take polls a month ago. And the last thing I would say on this is Donald Trump's base, just statistically speaking, is less likely to turn out than the Democrats. This, I think, is a reason why we've done well in special elections and off-year elections, is the kind of people that are now joining Democrats, identifying as Democrat, just have a higher turnout propensity. Okay, so what does that mean? That means, first of all, a really high turnout election probably favors Donald Trump. And the kind of people, again, that are in his base are going to check in later in the election. So Donald Trump doesn't need to peak in mid-August. He needs to peak in mid-October. So if I was sitting in Trump's headquarters and I was trying to rally my staff, I'd say, hey guys, let's keep plugging at it. We need to peak, in 6 weeks, okay? Don't worry about right now. Keep doing the work, peak in 6 weeks. And if I was in the Harris headquarters, I'd be saying, guess what? Donald Trump doesn't need to peak right now, so work harder, because we need to prevent him from peaking in 6 weeks. So this all again goes to dead heat. It's a dead heat.
You mentioned something I want to drill down on before we go to break. It sounds, if I heard you correctly, as if you believe the incumbency arrow has shifted. The incumbent arrow was straight on Biden, and that was a detriment.
Correct.
It is not on Harris. Correct. It is on Trump. It has shifted from Biden to Trump. How is that possible when he's not the office holder? Is incumbency a state of mind as much as it is a title?
I think that's right. Look, I also think Harris represents change. People didn't know a lot about her. She's younger. She looks younger, certainly. She's female. That would be the future. That would be a change. Donald Trump is someone we've had in our politics for a very long time now, for 8 years. And he was president. So it is incredible to think about, but she really has this opportunity to just take this enormous strength he had to say, I'm going to, were you better off 4 years ago? Prices were cheaper, so on and so forth. And she can just flip that on its head to say, let's not worry about 4 years ago. Let's worry about the next 4 years. Let's worry about the future. And I represent the future. And the other thing, that's remarkable for her is, gosh, if you came to me and said, you can run a 2-year campaign or a, 3-month campaign, I'd take the 3-year campaign or the 3-month campaign in a heartbeat. She's fresh. She's energetic. I love that they're doing a bus tour, right? Nothing says energy like a bus tour. Donald Trump can't do a bus tour. No. He's probably too old.
That is the voice of Robby Mook, who was the campaign manager for Hillary Clinton in 2016. On the other side of this break, we're going to talk about the unique challenges that face a woman leading a national party ticket when we come back.
If the story coming out of something is how you look, it's hard to have people hear the things you're trying to say.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Things that have never happened before are hard to happen. It's just a fact. We've never elected a woman president. Robby, you know that better than anyone in America.
I do.
As campaign manager for Hillary Clinton, what are the unique challenges? I just want you to enumerate them. We'll describe how unfair or fair they are, but what are the unique challenges, meaning only challenges that fall upon the shoulders of a woman seeking the presidency in the United States?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, on an upbeat note, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote. So if we're just thinking about, is America open to this? Yes. Now, is the Electoral College open to it? That's a separate question. But I think women face a series of unique challenges. Obviously, I'm not in a position to understand those perfectly because I'm a man. But first and foremost, in my experience, I've run a U.S. Senate race for a woman candidate, Jeanne Shaheen, and then Hillary's campaign, and I saw on both of those definitely a focus on some superficial things that I don't think men have. So what clothing are they wearing? What color is the clothing? How does it fit? Hair, makeup, all these things. Every woman politician I've ever worked for has to wake up an hour earlier or 2 hours earlier in the day so, they can get their hair done and their makeup done. And I'm not saying that because they necessarily want to do that. They're just judged in a way if they don't do that. It blocks their ability to message. Because if the story coming out of something is how you look, it's hard to have people hear the things you're trying to say. So I think those can be impediments to just messaging. I think the other challenge I believe women candidates have is I think for men it's a lot easier to be ambitious and to seek a higher office. I remember when I was working for Jeanne Shaheen, she'd been governor I think for 3 terms, and sometimes we'd get asked, well, hasn't she done enough? Why does she want that? And we were running against a male politician who'd also been in office before. So I said, well, why are you asking her that and not him? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so I think particularly for women trying to seek the highest office, it's sometimes, well, why does she want this? What's her real motivation? And I can't explain why that exists, but I definitely have seen it. And again, what these things serve to do
and
is
then you also have the metaphor of the father of the country.
Exactly, right.
It's a masculine job in our psyche.
Right, and we know that Donald Trump's plan with Biden was strength over weakness. Right. And yes, for a woman to be commander-in-chief, when we think about the U.S. military and who should lead it, traditionally men have done that. Interestingly, that wasn't a problem for Hillary Clinton. We saw again and again in all of our research and our polling, people thought she was completely prepared to be commander-in-chief, to run the Situation Room, make decisions, press the button, if she had to. And I haven't really seen that pushback with Harris, probably because she's been vice president and people have seen her in the Situation Room and so on. But definitely, I think for a candidate maybe who's a governor or a senator, people might ask those questions in a way that they just wouldn't for a man.
Is her ethnicity also a layover on femininity?
Probably for some people. I hope not. I remember when Obama was first running, there was a sense, well, can an African-American who has the middle name Hussein, can he really become president? And he did. And so I'd like to think at the end of the day, voters are pretty open-minded. But, we'll see. And I think we'll see as we get later in the campaign.
And the filtration of all this, do you feel, is fundamentally different in 2024 than it was in 2016?
I do. A great example of this to me is when Hillary ran in 2008, she was the woman candidate. And you saw in 2020 in the primary, there were the women candidates. It wasn't unusual or strange that a woman was running. We saw I think the same things happened to the Republicans. Nikki Haley was the woman candidate. I think we're going to have the women candidates in the next Republican primary. So my hope is that this glass ceiling is truly breaking down. We will have a woman president. It's only a matter of time. I hope it will be this time. But in my mind, you just don't want these things to seem unusual or historic. You want it to just be normal. And I think we're progressing there. We're getting there.
You said right before the break you'd rather have a 3-month campaign than a 2-year campaign. Why?
Yeah. It's a great question. Well, I think in Harris's case specifically, she would be held a lot more accountable every day for every single thing that the administration is doing. And I think that hasn't been the case. But secondly, these things are exhausting. And there's a newness to her candidacy right now. She gets to, roll out policy and, how's she going to run her campaign? What's she going to be like on the stump? So that newness creates a lot of interest, a lot of things for the press to write about. I mean, you'd know better than me, but 6 months in, 8 months in, it's all old. We know all this stuff. And so I think they tend to nitpick a little bit more.
Sifted all the white papers, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly. Yeah.
You said that she's going to have to give interviews. Is she?
She said she will, and I'm sure she will.
Press conferences.
I imagine so. I mean, she's already gone. You've seen she'll get off the plane and talk to the press,
Right.
gaggle. So
my calculation on this always is I want one every day, all the time, from whoever is running or whoever is president. I don't get that. Why? Because the calculation is different. It's a risk reward.
Yes, exactly.
And when you are down, you need to chase the press. When you are leading, you don't need to chase the press. You can or can't at your discretion.
Exactly.
That's where she is.
Yeah, I think, well, and again, there's this newness, so there's lots to cover. She doesn't have to create news. I think you saw J.D. Vance walk over to her plane because he needed to create some news. It was really hard for the Trump people to get attention on the things that they wanted to talk about. But, there will come a point where she'll have to sit down and do that, and I'm sure she will.
From a rules-based perspective, meaning the DNC, Republicans say this was a coup. Respond.
Well, first and foremost, the party delegates choose the nominee, and they chose her. Second, Joe Biden made the decision to step down. He wrote that letter. We know that. He made that decision. That's been well reported. So that's very different than Joe Biden saying, I still want to be the nominee, and the delegates voting him out somehow. But at the end of the day, the parties aren't governed by the U.S. Constitution. They're governed by the party and the party's rules, and the party's rules tend to be fairly flexible. I personally think there's a little jealousy by some Republicans that they didn't maybe make a change in 2016 or this time. But yeah, I mean, he left the race.
With Biden at the top of the ticket, is it a winnable race?
I think it was really hard.
Sounds like a no.
What I was seeing was Minnesota was going to be tough, New Hampshire was going to be tough, Virginia was going to be tough. If you're that far in the Electoral College, I don't see how you win the race.
Are there any states that Trump won in 2020 that you think Harris is in a position to win if this momentum continues?
I think North Carolina is the one state that is in play that he won in 2020. It's hard for me to think of a state beyond that we could truly have a real shot at winning. Florida always sort of comes up occasionally. And my guess is that'll be a closer state. And what we're seeing in the Southeast is that states where there's a lot of people moving down from the Midwest and the Northeast, like South Carolina, are just getting closer and closer every year. So by the same token that Georgia is competitive now, South Carolina is sort of following a lot of those trends. But I don't think South Carolina is winnable right now.
Of course not. And the problem for Democrats in Florida is there's a 1 million registration delta.
Yeah.
1 million more registered Republicans than Democrats in Florida, which is a seismic shift. The abortion referenda on the ballot could make a difference. There are some polling that shows Harris within 5 or 6. You still think it's on the outside looking in?
Yeah, because I think she'll only lose by a few points. But to your point earlier, it's just so hard to close those last probably 3 or 4 points. It's really, really tough. And the growth that's happening in Florida isn't favorable to us necessarily, and it's complicated. Florida's an incredibly diverse state. You've got Cuban American, South American, Central American, so Puerto Rican. So the dynamics there aren't necessarily in our favor the way they are in, say, Georgia, where the growth is more African Americans and African American and white voters moving from other parts of the country.
Voice of Robby Mook, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2016. When we come back for segment 3, we're going to talk about hacking. He has memories, and they're not pleasant. Stay tuned. Back in a minute.
The pattern here is these are all effectively dictatorships: Russia, Iran, China.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Robby Mook, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2016, is with us. So again, recording this August 15th. Keep that in mind, ladies and gentlemen. So things might happen after this. But up until this day, Robby Mook, Microsoft, Google, and Facebook have all recently released reports talking about foreign adversaries involving themselves in this election. Google and Microsoft specifically have flagged Iranian attempts to either use phishing expeditions or hacking to interfere in the Trump and Harris campaigns. Let me give you a moment to just evaluate that in the present, and then we'll talk about your bitter experience with that in 2016.
Yeah. Look, it is present. It is real. This actually goes all the way back to 2012. So one of the things I learned after 2016 was that the Chinese have been trying to break into the Romney and Obama campaigns. Obviously, we had problems with Russia in 2016. I think this is the new normal. The pattern here is these are all effectively dictatorships. Russia, Iran, China, North Korea could do this too, wouldn't surprise me. And their objective is to create discord in the country. Now, I think in the case of Iran, they might want to punish Donald Trump for the assassination of Soleimani and other things. So I think for all of them, they want to influence our foreign policy. You know, they want to punish people that they didn't like. But I think more broadly, the center of gravity of our country, the thing that holds us together is our presidency when we think about foreign policy. And so they want to do everything they can to disrupt the presidency, create discord, create uncertainty, create confusion. I feel good in a way coming out of what just happened here because I think the response has been very different to 2016. I think, a lot of reporters, they were trying to, the Iranians, it sounds like, or through puppets, were trying to shop this information around. I think there was a lot of caution on that. And I think for all Americans, when material is stolen, because it is stolen, and deliberately pushed, we all need to think about that and have that perspective that this information coming to me is something that the Iranians wanted me to see, or the Chinese Communist Party or Vladimir Putin. And I think this is just here to stay.
I heard in your voice some praise for reporters who are being more circumspect about this. Do you agree with that judgment? And what are your feelings about its lack of existence in 2016?
Yeah, well, look, if I'm giving people some credit, this was totally new in 2016. Okay, but personally, I know others went out there and said this information has been stolen by Russian intelligence and deliberately given to you, reporters, to hurt Hillary Clinton as revenge for Hillary Clinton's actions as Secretary of State that Vladimir Putin didn't like. And I think for some people it was so, I don't know what the word is, fantastical, that I don't even know if that's a word.
In your Frontline interview, you said people thought it was spin.
Yeah,
right. And held it against you.
Right. Yeah,
and
they were
discredited you and those within the Clinton campaign for making this assertion.
Yes. And I think as more information came in, people believed it more. But what's always fascinating to me is it was independently reported by experts. These weren't my ideas, that there was the Cyrillic alphabet. There was metadata on these documents that were being given to reporters. And in fact, one of the usernames that was involved was the name of a former Russian intelligence agent, head of the intelligence agency. So, these weren't things we were making up. The evidence was right there.
Do you think reporters are being cautious now because they have reevaluated this, or because what's been handed over to date isn't juicy enough?
It's a very good question. If I'm being honest, I think it's a little bit of both, but I would like to think that there's a new ethical framework that people are working within. Look, I think
because reporters in 2016 were salivating over the juicy details and all the stuff that came out about Podesta and Bernie Sanders and everything else.
Absolutely. Look, and I think people weaponized it against us, other politicians, and Trump went out there and said, hey, Russia, if you have our emails, leak more. The irony, of course, of this situation is Roger Stone, Steve Bannon testified in court that Roger Stone, one of the Trump operatives, was in touch with WikiLeaks about their release schedule, and it was apparently Roger Stone that got hacked by the Iranians. So I think there's a little bit of
there's a karmic circle there somewhere.
Karmic circle, and again, I don't wish this on anybody. I don't. But I like to be positive. I'm glad that people are handling this differently now.
So, what effect, if any, do you think J.D. Vance and Tim Walz have had on this race?
I think the vice presidential pick has been different this cycle than other cycles because Harris and Walz kind of came as a unit right off the bat. You know, Harris wasn't running for, let's say, a year until she made this choice. And then I think Vance has been more controversial, more offensive, really, than previous candidates. You know, your number one rule on your VP pick is do no harm. And I think he's done some harm. I think he's blocked their ability to message on the things they needed to message on. So he's definitely hurt them. If you ask me this question normally, how important is the VP pick? I'd say it tends to be exaggerated. But it's funny, Vance to me is an example of why I think people often say, oh, you should have picked someone more exciting. You should have picked someone who had a little bit more pizzazz. Well, this is kind of why, because I think the more sizzly they are, the more they just take attention away from your presidential candidate, and the more potentially controversial they are. I think Walz is a brilliant communicator, but you'll notice he doesn't say anything that detracts. He's not creating separate controversies, and I think that's the problem with Vance, is he creates separate controversies. The other critique I would have of the Trump people is you don't want to pick someone, it's like a Lego piece where you say, oh, they bring XYZ, let's just latch them onto the campaign and they're gonna get us more, you know, young white men in the Midwest done. It doesn't work that way. And when the marriage, so to speak, seems inauthentic, I think that hurts you. We saw this also with Palin, with John McCain. It was like they sort of brought her in to be this exciting young woman, you know, addition to the ticket. It just didn't work because they clearly didn't mesh. And I think we're seeing the same thing with Trump.
My theory on vice presidential candidates is, can you send your candidate into enemy territory and do so with confidence?
Yes, yes, yes.
Would you say that Harris can with Walz? Meaning
absolutely.
Rural America, exurban America, where Democrats are weaker.
Yes.
Can you send Vance into suburban and urban America on behalf of Trump?
Well, here's the interesting thing. I think you can, because at the end of the day, he's an elite Ivy League educated lawyer. You know, he's actually, I've seen him speak in person. You know, he's very comfortable here, you know, with lobbyists in DC, as he claims to be in other settings. What I like about Walz is he's very versatile. I think a lot of different audiences like him. He certainly can speak culturally to voters in the Midwest, to gun owners, you know, veterans, and so on. But he also is capable of handling tough questions. And I don't see that as much with Vance. He seems to kind of stumble because I think he's used to defending Trump and basically just sort of peddling the same lies. But when it's about him, it doesn't work as well when he has to defend his own record. And so I think that's why you've seen him kind of stumbling a little bit.
Is part of that a reflection of the microculture of politics, in which politicians now can find the same audience in podcast places and internet places, and not realize that the comfortability they enjoy there is not necessarily the comfortability they will enjoy on a national stage or taking that on the road to a broader audience?
It's such an interesting question. So yes, I definitely think that's true. Our information ecosystem is so siloed. You can do a lot of media in a very comfortable place. But the other thing I will say is, and I don't know what the explanation for this is, but Donald Trump is special. He is Teflon in a way. And what we've seen, you know, take George Santos, take, you know, some Matt Gaetz, some of these other members of Congress. They go out there and they try to do the Trump thing where they gaslight and they stonewall and they just lie, and it doesn't work. And I think we're seeing that a little bit with Vance, that he was very successful just kind of continuing Trump's narrative. But as soon as it was about him, it doesn't hold up in the same way. And I wish I could tell you why that is. I wish I could unlock that recipe, but I have no idea why.
From the voice of Robby Mook, Donald Trump is special. Underline that, ladies and gentlemen. Back for segment 4 in just 1 second.
I do believe he has to win this campaign for himself, and I don't know how much that mechanics actually matters to him.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Robby Mook, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2016, is with us. So I'm a native of California. My ears have already perked up because California is becoming a sub-issue in this race. California is a disaster, so says the Trump-Vance ticket. Kamala Harris is responsible for the disaster of California. Is that a real thing? Is that something that Harris should be nervous about or wary of?
I think it's a cultural beacon, to say, do you want the rest of the country to be like California, which the right has tried to turn into a boogeyman. Now, the fact of the matter is, California is one of the biggest economies in the world.
The fourth largest in the world. It surpassed Germany earlier this fiscal year.
Yeah, it's doing pretty well. So I think it kind of breaks down at a factual level. But look, there's a lot of boogeymen there, big tech, Hollywood, and so on. So I think that's what that's really about. I'm not worried about it specifically because I think it just feeds into this broader narrative of they're trying to turn her into a cultural elitist who doesn't understand you and your family.
A dangerous liberal, too.
Exactly, which is, I think, probably the right way for them to go. I just think what they do is they overdo it a little bit sometimes. This isn't that hard. Groceries are a lot more expensive today than they were 2 years ago. So just hold her accountable as a member of the administration for that. You don't have to kind of turn it into this series of kind of fantastical boogeymen and try to, jam Hollywood in there somehow. I think this is actually very simple, and I think that's where Trump has been really getting himself tripped up. He gave an economic speech, I think, just a day or two ago, where he had a bunch of tax cuts he was trying to propose, and that wasn't the news that came out of it because he just meandered into all this other stuff. So. Far be it from me to give advice to Donald Trump, but, I think this message is pretty simple.
So, in addition to harnessing the energy, keeping the momentum going, finding jobs for all these volunteers who are asking to help, which is not an easy thing to do. Scaling up is very difficult. It's a huge challenge. There's also a meshing of campaign leadership that Kamala Harris has to navigate. She just brought in David Plouffe from President Obama's two successful 2008 and 2012 campaigns, overlaying that in an already existing campaign infrastructure inherited from President Biden. You know what these conversations are like. You know what these Zoom calls are like. You know what these conference rooms are like. How difficult is that, and what are some of the dangers or risks involved?
Yeah, I think the key in doing this is there are parts of the campaign that are pretty operational that I actually don't know that it makes a huge difference whether your candidate is Joe Biden, or Kamala Harris. And you just mentioned them. The organizing work, even some of the press work is somewhat mechanical in the way that it goes. But the fuel rod of a campaign is the story you're trying to tell. And that is going to be very different if you're Joe Biden versus Kamala Harris. And you need to make it different. And so what I'm seeing is she's bringing in some new people to help build that storytelling out. So some of the media, the strategy, so on and so forth. So that's really good. And keep in mind, Jen O'Malley Dillon, who is running Biden's campaign and is now running Harris's, I give her a ton of credit for Obama's 2008, 2012 campaigns too.
Not a stranger.
So these
there.
people aren't strangers. They've worked together. Jim Margolis, David Binder, who's coming in to do the polling. So these people have all worked together. I'm actually not that concerned. This could have gone very differently, where you had, let's say you had some people who were from California and hadn't done a presidential together, before, and it could get a little bit trickier, not impossible. So I'm not worried about this, some kind of drama erupting, but the delicate piece is getting that narrative and that story right. I'm really encouraged by what I see, but they got to land it at the convention, and we'll see that in the next
It has
week.
been said that Trump's campaign is better organized, more professional, and more focused, at least on the ground. This time around. You agree?
No question. Yeah, an interesting decision.
Is that a important asset for Trump, even as he is having some difficulty responding to the changing dynamics of this race?
It's a very interesting question. As someone who worked on campaigns for many, many years, I'd like to think that what we did made a difference, and I believe that. But if you look at the Clinton campaign in 2016 versus the Trump campaign, take Florida. We had a field operation with hundreds of staff, dozens of offices. We spent so much time and effort getting that all set up. And then Trump's turnout was just huge on Election Day. And I think that was about Donald Trump. I don't think there's anything I could have done mechanically to countervene that. And his field operation was a disaster. It was well documented. So It remains to be seen. I really believe in that fuel rod in a campaign, that story that it's telling, that energy it emanates. Sometimes that's a team effort. In Donald Trump's case, I think that is Donald Trump. And so I do believe he has to win this campaign for himself. And I don't know how much that mechanics actually matters to him.
At a meta level, how much does anger in the public mind matter?
It certainly matters, again, in this change dynamic I was talking about. So if they want a new regime, they want something different, I think it matters enormously, and I think that's why this was a lot harder for Biden. But again, Trump built a campaign to harness dissatisfaction with the administration, and I think that playbook doesn't really work anymore with Harris. They're not burdening her with what has been, and so yeah, if I'm in the Trump headquarters, I'm really having to scratch my head and rework everything.
Calibrate for me the Harris strategy on abortion and immigration.
Yeah. Abortion, I believe, is our not-so-secret weapon this cycle. I think for Biden, it was incredibly important. I think for Harris, it's important, but almost less so, interestingly, because I think she's organically getting excitement. And I think the abortion issue was a way to generate excitement for Biden, which is interesting. The border, I love what she's doing on the border right now, holding Trump accountable for tanking that immigration bill that was truly bipartisan, truly conservative, with the capital
almost
C.
nothing for Democrats.
Yeah, we didn't like it, but we were ready to do it because, there were problems there. I think that's the first thing that she's done well, is just to acknowledge, yeah, there's problems there, and we had a solution for it, and he's the one who blocked it. So I think that's actually been blunted somewhat. And it's interesting to me, too, this is really dominating Republican advertising right now. These are the attack ads they're running, which is on the border, and I sort of get that, but where's inflation? Where's pocketbook? It's odd to me that they've put so many eggs in that basket where Trump genuinely has a weakness, where he can go out there on prices and say, things were a lot cheaper when I was president. So I question that decision they've made to some extent.
What do you think the polling advantage ought to be for Harris coming out of the convention?
That's a great question. Look, I would love for her to have that 4-point popular vote margin, but again, there's always going to be a little bit of undecided. So I don't expect her to have that. But yeah, if she's coming out with a 2-3 point advantage, that would be fantastic. But again, I'll take a dead heat. After the last few months, I'll take a dead heat. Absolutely.
That is the voice of Robby Mook, campaign manager for Hillary Clinton. Stay tuned for your Takeout Outtake Especial.
If I'd known James Comey was going to come out and send a letter about Hillary 3 days out of the election, I would have done a lot more, I think, in October to say, hey, this race is close.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. Robby Mook is our special guest, Hillary Clinton's campaign manager in 2016. We talked earlier in the show about some polling data, 2016, comparing it to now. I want to go a little bit farther in the Wayback Machine, just to remind people that things can shift in politics very rapidly. I want to take you back to July 22nd, 1988. Upon that day, Michael Dukakis led George Herbert Walker Bush 55% to 38%. George Herbert Walker Bush went on to win that race by more than 400 electoral votes. The last time we had a presidential candidate amass more than 400 electoral votes. I mean, we went up slightly, 4 years, to June of 1992. In June of 1992, independent candidate Ross Perot had 39% in the polls. George Herbert Walker Bush had 31%. Bill Clinton had 25%. Bill Clinton won that race with 43% of the popular vote and 370 electoral votes. Robby, what does that tell you?
Peaking in August doesn't tell you anything.
Cut it.
I hope she hasn't peaked. I hope she's just going to keep going up, obviously. But yeah, you can't, look, you can never take anything for granted. And one of the things we struggled with in 2016 was the race was more volatile than we were used to. And we saw that, for example, when James Comey came out and did a press conference, that the race really tightened up. If I'd known James Comey was going to come out and send a letter about Hillary 3 days out of the election, I would have done a lot more, I think, in October to say, hey, this race is close. Nobody's vote is a throwaway. If you want Donald Trump as president, vote for Donald Trump or any of these third-party candidates. But if you don't want him to win, you got to support Hillary. And so I think that's going to be really important going into September as ballots are starting to get mailed out. No matter what their lead is in the polls, they got to tell people this is a dead heat.
Do you expect there to be just one debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump or more?
I think it depends how the first one goes. You made a point earlier that when you're ahead, you don't want risk. When you're behind, you invite risk because you got to change the dynamic. So I think it's somewhat up to Donald Trump. I think Harris is probably more amenable to doing debates than he is. If he is ahead and comfortable and he's done one debate, I don't think he's doing any more. But if he's behind, he may say, hey, yeah, I want to do more of these. We'll see.
And for Harris, what is, having gone through this, the most important thing she needs to remember and prepare for when facing Donald Trump?
It's a great point. She wins this election by being the change candidate and proving that she can do something to improve people's economic future. When you're debating Donald Trump, he baits you every 5 seconds on all kinds of outrageous lies and insults. So you have to respond to some of that because you can't let him get away with everything, but you've got to spend some bandwidth saying something about yourself, not just reacting to him. It's incredibly complicated. This is, you know, 7-dimensional chess you have to do when you're debating him. But she's a prosecutor, so I actually think she has the perfect background and skill set to do this, but it's very, very hard. Hillary was an incredibly experienced debater, and this was really hard for her.
In marketing and in politics, the most dangerous thing to be is a fading fad. Is Trump?
I certainly hope so.
What do you think?
I don't know. Honestly, I could see either scenario on Election Day. And I think if you can't imagine either scenario on Election Day, you're either delusional or overly confident. I mean, I can't tell you if this is 2016 or 2020. In part, by the way, they were both incredibly close elections. The Electoral College outcomes looked very different, but the margins in these states was minute. And so I have every reason to think this has to be a very close election again.
Voice of Robby Mook, Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign manager. Robby, it's been a pleasure. Thanks.
It was great. Thanks.
See you next week, folks.